Hello again, everybody. Gary Ferman and Matt Shodell here. And today we are talking about the biggest question facing the 2024 Miami Hurricanes as they get ready for training camp and to embark on a new football season. Matt, I think you nailed it on this one, coming up with this question. I'm going to give you full credit because you identified the biggest question as, can they develop the young players on the team, not just to provide support and depth for this season, but to emerge as impactful starting players in the 2025-2026 seasons so that Miami can rely less on the transfer portal, more on homegrown talent. And more than anything, I'm going to add to your argument, they need to develop some elite players, okay? And, you know, we're saying a lot of great things about this 2024 Miami team. We think that the talent has been significantly improved, but here's what it does not have. It does not have elite. It does not have guys that are going to go most likely in the first or second round of the NFL draft unless Cam Ward has the most unbelievable season here this year and gets himself up to that level of status. Right now, going into the season, they do not have anybody that is projected in that neighborhood. Cam Ward is seen as about a fourth-round draft pick. Jalen Rivers, fifth-rounder, maybe. Inez Cooper has got getting some interest from the NFL. So he could be a guy that they look at after this year. But you don't have the elite of the elite. And Matt, when we're ranking the top 50 players on the team, the guys that we're putting right at the top are Cam Ward and Ruben Bain. Okay. Ruben Bain, a lot of accolades, was the freshman defensive player of the year in the ACC, had a great first season, did phenomenal things. Okay. But he is not the elite of elite yet. He is not somebody that the NFL is saying, oh my God, he's going to be a first round pick. Ruben Bain had 5 sacks last year, okay? This is a program where guys that were not valued by the National Football League, like a Rusty Medeiros, had 18 sacks, Daniel Stubbs, Kevin Patrick. I mean, we've had some really good defensive ends in this program, not to mention Gregory Rousseau and Jalen Phillips, who didn't put up those kind of numbers, but who were pretty darn good defensive ends that were way further along than where Ruben Bain is right now. Now, maybe Ruben gets there. We love Ruben Bain. We think he's a great player, the kind of player you would want to see the Miami Hurricanes have. But there is still a lot of development ahead for Ruben Bain and everybody else on this team, which brings us to the biggest question facing the team, and that is, and the program, can they develop these young players and emerge with some elite guys on the other end? And Matt, I can't believe I'm with you 100% on this one, but I am. Give us some initial thoughts, and then I'm going to throw a few other points at it.
Well, since you agree with me, I'm going to change the premise. I don't think that's the biggest question anymore. I'm changing that. This is all in, it depends how you define it, right? The biggest question globally, like, for instance, you could point to, the planet heating up. Well, the sun eventually is going to crash into the earth anyway, or take over the earth. Like, we only got another few billion years left. Ferman's been around since the dinosaurs, but like, even that's a blip in the amount of time, the planet has. So look, eventually this planet's not going to be here. Like, everybody you talk to, the sun's going to get hotter and closer and stronger, whatever, not closer, but it's going to eventually burn up this planet. Okay. So it just depends how big you want to go out and how far you want to go out. So, if the biggest question for this season, obviously, is not what we're talking about today. And, we're going to do a lot of analysis in the season, but, I don't love the way too early polls. I don't like power index. The ESPN power indexes are awful. It's like AI generated from like Gary Ferman's IQ. It's like ridiculous. It makes no sense. So what I rely on is, actual odds. I like odds makers because their money's at stake. They don't want to be wrong, and they have to balance it. If everyone's putting money down on one team to win the national championship, they can't give them great odds right? They have to change the odds. So I find odds to be very reassuring in terms of the experts sort of know, and it's a huge amount of input from the entire country, people betting on it, essentially, to determine these odds. And, you know, as you look at that for this year, for instance, you know, Miami's consistently the number 3 pick with all these, there's like 8 different odds out for the ACC championship, to win the ACC championship, behind FSU and Clemson. And they're pretty far behind FSU and Clemson, but they're also pretty far ahead of Louisville at number 4. So, you know, that tells you something. It tells you Miami is going to be a lot better record-wise than last year, according to the odds. And then as far as, you know, national championship odds, Miami's 16th pretty much, right? Only Florida State's ahead of them in terms of opponents. So they should be ranked number 16 according to that, but they're not. Heisman Trophy odds, you got Cam Ward 10th, essentially. And then for win totals, you know, it's 9.5 for Miami. And the only opponents that has that is FSU at 9.5. Everyone else is below that. So, you know, everything is pointing to Miami being really, really good. But I don't know, for those of you that remember last year, Miami was ranked 22nd in the country after the Texas A&M game. We wrote a story saying Miami could go undefeated based on what fans were thinking. Like, that was a story we wrote after the Texas A&M game.
I don't remember that.
Why can't Miami go undefeated? They beat Texas A&M. Who else do we play? You know, people didn't know FSU was going to go undefeated at that point. People didn't know Miami was going to lose to, you know, Georgia Tech and just not be a very good team. And at some point this summer, we're going to go through Miami's entire schedule and do a best case scenario and a worst case scenario. Spoiler alert. Why can't I say that succinctly? Spoiler alert, I've already started working on it. And there's a realistic chance Miami goes undefeated. There's also, to me, a realistic chance that Miami loses 5 games. And the chance of Miami going undefeated, if you think Florida State's a toss-up game, which I think is fair, right? We'll call it a 50-50 to be fair to Miami at home. I think Miami fans would take a 50-50 chance to win that game. And I think Louisville right now is the only game in which Miami's an underdog, but we're going to call that 50-50 because it's a 1-point line right now, okay? Just mathematically, if you have 2 50-50 occurrences in any aspect of your life, okay, there's a 25% chance that both outcomes are going to happen. In other words, there's a 25% chance Miami goes 2-0 in those games. That's not a very good percent chance. They have a 25% mathematical chance to beat 2 50-50 outcomes, you know, to win both.
Yeah, I'm hearing increasingly better things about Florida.
Yeah, I know you posted that. It's a bunch of
South Florida, Virginia Tech.
Yeah, magically in the offseason, all of a sudden Florida's great. Listen to me. This is what happens every freaking year. Miami wants to. It's like.
I'm talking to people.
What a good example. They want to
right?
make the other team seem great, and they need to, because guess what? If Miami wants to be in the playoffs, they have to convince people that the teams they're beating are really, really good teams. They don't want to be like, oh, these teams are terrible. We beat a bunch of terrible teams. We belong in the playoffs.
I'm talking to people that are studying their personnel.
Everything we are going to hear out of Miami for the rest of existence until December is going to be how great every opponent is, because they need everyone else to believe that. Florida's win over-under has not changed from 4.5. Nothing has happened since the spring. There has been zero movement. But you're going to hear a lot of people at Miami talking about how good Florida is. And you know what? Florida is good. Florida is good compared to Miami. If Florida had Miami's schedule, they're over-under.
I'm going to take the over right now.
If Florida had Miami's schedule, they would have an over-under win total probably of about 8.5, maybe even 9. You know, they're not a bad team, but they're not a good SEC team. They're playing Texas A&M. They're playing really good out-of-conference teams. They played Georgia, LSU, Texas. You know, I mean, their schedule's ridiculous. They have one win. That's Samford. You know, USF is their next easiest game. Like, they're in big trouble schedule-wise, unless they're really, really good. So Miami's going to beat a team that's going to probably wind up with 5 or 6 wins. That's just the truth. And that doesn't look good, even though Florida's a good team. And then who else does Miami play? Florida State and Louisville. So you got to somehow convince people that what? Syracuse is amazing. Cal's amazing.
And South Florida and Virginia Tech are going to be decent teams.
Virginia Tech's over-under in wins right now is 7.5. You know, they'll be okay. They'll win 8 games maybe, you know, but these are not amazing teams. But somehow along the way, if Miami's going to lose 2 games and want to be in the playoffs, Miami has to somehow convince the people who vote in polls, which count for the playoff system, that they beat meaningful teams. It's either that or Miami's got to win these games by 40 points and just blow everyone out, you know, because there's going to be a lot of 2-loss teams. So if Miami's going to only lose one game all year, great, they'll be in the playoffs. But I think it's more realistic they lose 2. And if they lose 2 and want to be in the playoffs, there's going to be a bunch of teams. Like the 2 wins now is going to be like the 1-loss teams that used to try to get into the top 4. You lose 2 games now, it's like you're right on that edge, with the other 30 teams that lose 2 games in the country, or 20 teams. I got to look at how many it is, but there's going to be a lot, that lose 2 games in the whole country. So, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens if Miami does lose 2 games. But again, going back to last year, this is a team that lost, that was ranked 22nd after the Texas A&M game, and people were saying, who are we going to lose to? Who are we going to lose to? We're better than everybody. We're better than everyone we play. Maybe FSU will be tough. Clemson's having a terrible year, right? Clemson was a bad team last year. They weren't good the year before. So they're like, we could beat Clemson, and they did. So, if you said, oh, we beat Clemson, then I think if you say we're going to beat Clemson at that point, fans are thinking we're undefeated. And the team wound up with 5 losses. So there's no predicting what's going to happen this coming season. You could say what the biggest question is. The biggest question for the coming season is, will Miami be undefeated, or will they lose 5 games, and where they're going to fall in between there? Because it could be anywhere in there. They can realistically lose 5 games. There's 5 teams that are decent. 5 teams that are decent, 7 that are just bad. And yeah, they've lost to bad teams before. I think they're done with that. I think thankfully we're over that hump. But so to me, you already talked about the biggest question. The biggest question is the future after this year, because what happens when all these portal guys are gone? Every single person they added in the portal that's going to start this year, and I think there's 8 to 10 of them, depending what happened with like Deani Hill and some guys, they're all gone. Deani Hill, I think, is still here. But the other 8 that right now are our first team on our depth chart, the Cam Wards, Martinez said he's leaving after 1 year. The other 7 are all one and dones. Zach Carpenter, Sam Brown, just go down the list. They're gone after 1 year. So do you have to reload again like FSU's doing in the portal? And by the way, FSU is probably going to be worse than last year, but they're doing the same thing they did last year. Just they hit Jared Verse and they hit these guys in the portal last year who were amazing, It's hard to do that every year. I wrote in the story, it's like a needle in the haystack. It's not really a needle in the haystack, but you have to not only find that player, but have to get that player to come to you and win bidding wars, and it costs a lot of money. The best way to win championships, in my opinion, if you want to look at it like it's almost like an NFL thing, right? There is a salary cap. It's just every team has a different one. Miami has an amount of money it can spend each year, believe it or not. You can call it a budget. You can call it whatever you want. They can go above the budget. You can go over the salary cap. But there's only so much money, and it's not $1 billion, okay? There's an amount of money they can spend, and that's the truth. It's a good amount of money compared to everyone else. It's right there with everyone else, the top programs that can spend. But if you want to get the best players for that amount of money, the best way to do it is to get, I'm waving at a gnat because apparently my decaying skin is attracting flies now. The best way to get to that championship is to get guys in high school that you can underpay for that then overperform compared to what you paid them. Because when you're in the transfer portal and you're looking for Cam Ward, who's already been great, you're paying $1.5 million. Or you got a DJ Lagway as a freshman who, whatever you're not paying $1.5 million for a high school kid, okay? But you're paying a decent amount of money, but still.
Oh, some of them are getting that much.
Well, yeah, and then Florida backs out on it. But the point is, if you can get, and maybe quarterback's a bad example, but if you can get a player, a running back, a defensive lineman, whatever it may be, out of high school, for those amounts of money where they're unproven, so they're not getting paid what these guys who are all conference are getting paid, those guys can have a great year for you. And you get 4, 5, 6 of those guys who have that first great year as their second year, third year of the program, whatever it is, their money year, okay? That's a free guy. In addition to the portal guys, you need to take the handful of free agents you need to get every year that are the gap fillers who have to be great. So that's how you win championships to me. And you can't take 15 portal guys every year. You don't have enough money to constantly do that every single year, and then they're gone after a year, and the money's just disappeared. You win 5, 6, 7 games, 8 games. That money's just in the wind after 1 year. You can develop and build a guy to become a great player and hopefully keep him after that because he's happy at a reasonable amount of money. But you can get that first really productive year essentially at a discount. So that's the goal. That's the NFL rookie contract, right? Miami needs to get NFL rookie contracts from their recruits. That's just the truth. And so that's why I say the biggest question is, can they do that? Is that the future? Will that happen this year where you start seeing these first and second year guys, and maybe even some third year guys that step up as redshirt sophomores, as true sophomores, even as true juniors? step up and be playmakers and show that they can be the next guy at that position next year. Because if you're going to use these 8 to 10 transfers constantly and eat up, 500-600 reps with those guys, and you never see anybody, like what happened with Raul Aguirre and whatever last year, those guys could have played 300 reps, 400 reps if they had to. I mean, it was a wasted season to me. You're not winning the championship. Let the young guys play type of deal, right? But they didn't. Remember last year I kept saying that, by the way? Play the young guys. Play the young guys. You already lost 3 games. Like, you're not winning the ACC championship anyway. They didn't. And now they don't know what they have. I don't want that to keep happening. That's the point. So that's the biggest question. Will they stop doing that? Will they start playing the young guys like Matt Shodell keeps saying to do after you lost a couple of games or 3 games and you're out of the national championship picture? Because that's what fans want. It's nice to be in the ACC title game and lose to FSU or Clemson, but it's nicer to be in the playoffs and competing to win a national title. And that's where I want them to get. So that's the question. Can they let the young guys play, get to the point where those young guys are reliable for next year, and then figure out and then really know based on those young guys playing in games and see what they have versus just practices and scout team stuff, know what they have in games, how guys respond, because they respond differently in games sometimes. And then you can fill in the gaps with the free agents once you know what you have behind these guys who are one and dones.
All right. So we've been ranking hits and misses in the recruiting classes, and it's a system that we created, and you were shining on the ESPN Power Index, and you mentioned some other system, but if anything you're going to rank, you got to have a system. Okay, so we created this hit or miss system, and we've been evaluating the recruiting classes. And as a comparison, we went and we looked at Alabama, and we looked at Mario's teams in Oregon, and what we found was that a good recruiting year pretty much is about a 45% hit rate. That 45% of the guys you offer scholarships that sign with you will become starters for multiple years, hopefully, during their Miami Hurricanes careers. And listen, it's a fine system. It's far from perfect. Rice, you could go evaluate Rice's recruiting class, okay, and you might end up with 45% of Rice's recruiting class starting for Rice. That doesn't mean it's a great recruiting class, okay? And this is what I'm getting at here, okay? We love to pat ourselves on the back here at Miami because, listen, it's the history. Like, we all want the same thing. We want the 2001 Miami Hurricanes to reinvent themselves and come back, okay? And we want to feel like these recruiting classes are elite recruiting classes. But I'm going to tell you flat out that they've been good recruiting classes, even with good hit rates. They have not been great recruiting classes because there are not a lot of signs that there are a ton of elite players on the roster. And I'm not going to count Cam Ward. He's a one-year loner. But I look at Francis Manoa. He looks like he's going to develop into a very high draft pick along the lines of former Canes. But the point I'm getting at, when we looked at Bama, for example, like, they had the same 45%, but their 45% were all getting drafted in the first and second rounds. Okay, that is a great recruiting class. That is an elite recruiting class. That is where hopefully one day again the Miami Hurricanes will be measured, because right now it's just simply not there. I mean, if you look at the homegrown talent, obviously, I just talked about the Manoa. I think Ruben Bain does have enormous potential to develop into a very good player. He's not elite yet. I mean, we can pump all the sunshine we want. He's not elite yet. I mean, he's just flat out. There's so much development left to do there. And that's kind of what we're talking about here today, that the next step for this program is to develop the players into better players than what they are coming out of high school. And that's why that's the big question for this year. That's why that is the big challenge for this year. And I know Matt Shodell can't wait to see how that plays out. I know I can't wait to see how it plays out. And hopefully you guys can't wait to see how it plays out, because things are getting more difficult next year. Okay, the schedule next year is much tougher than this year's schedule, and they are going to need some of these young guys from the last 2 recruiting classes, because we've pretty well established that everything before these last 2 was pretty much average as can be. Okay, these last 2 we feel have been pretty good. These guys now need to develop. A few of them need to emerge as elite. Matt, any closing thoughts?
Well, Alabama's 2020 recruiting class compared to Miami, 25% of that class was first round NFL picks. You know? I mean, that's
as opposed to 0% for Miami.
Yeah. I mean, that's crazy, you know. But you know, you do tend to get hung up a little bit too much on the NFL, NFL draft stuff. You know, it is nice to have. It is nice to have a few first round NFL guys, but there are great college players who just aren't NFL body types. So you know, and honestly, vice versa. We've seen so many Miami players go to the NFL where they weren't so great at Miami, and they were pretty darn good in the NFL, right? And Miami just couldn't figure out how to use them correctly. But you know, they're trending in the right way. You know, Mario Cristobal's recruiting is just off the charts good. And that's why I want to see his players. I want to see his players. I don't need to see the portal guys he recruited for a month or a week. You know, I want to see the guys he recruited for 2 and 3 years that he won over, that, you know, are buying into what he told them they are going to be able to do in this program, and not guys who are coming for a paycheck for a year. Like, I don't need the mercenaries, man. You know, that's not for me.
Well, good luck. That's the way of the world in college football now. If you like this show, like our shows and our YouTube channel, and you're on YouTube right now, hit your subscribe and like buttons. It helps us with the algorithms in growing our audience. If you are not yet a subscriber to CaneSport.com, come on over right now. Get yourself a subscription. You can read this great story today about the biggest question facing the 2024 team, and all kinds of other coverage that we have, recruiting coverage, so forth and so on. You will not be sorry. You get a subscription to CaneSport.com, and you also will become a member of our great fan community. Everyone's on the message boards every day, chopping it up with each other on all kinds of subjects, not just like what we're talking about today, but you would be amazed how many topics people can come up with that they want to have discussion about. And so it makes our war room message room so great. We have a recruiting board. Come on over, become a member of CaneSport.com. If you're not already, you will not be sorry. So that's going to do it for today. For Matt Shodell, I'm Gary Ferman. We thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next time, everybody.